All right, this module is going to be about acquisition, and it's just a very high-level overview. I've adapted these slides from the management course, which is the DIWA, one of the DIWA certification courses, and that certainly is a lot deeper than anything I'm going to go into here. But my main objective here is to just make you a little familiar with the JSIDS process, because it's just so ubiquitous today, and you're going to hear that if you're going to touch acquisition at all, you're going to hear about JSIDS, and I just want to make sure that you have some level of familiarity with all the different parts and can talk the talk and hold your own in whatever you're going to try and do. Now, nobody expects you to read this, of course. I don't even think you could possibly, but I'll make this PDF available on our website. This is what's often referred to as the acquisition horse blanket, because it's got everything in it, all milestones, every variation of every decision point, everything that you could possibly have to do within the law, that is, federal acquisition requirements, etc., that apply to anything you might want to procure, can be mapped into this picture. And you're going to see some very, very simplified versions of this later on in this briefing, but I just wanted you to at least see this is pretty complicated stuff. But you got to figure a lot of the things that we in the Department of Defense procure are, aircraft carriers and major weapon systems that are super sophisticated, and nothing we're going to talk about is that sophisticated, but we fit into the same ecosystem that they have to fit in. We have to follow the same rules, even though lots of things don't apply to us. Just good to know what's there. This is I simplified that crazy complicated thing into the picture on the top with the A, the B, and the C. Those are milestones. You'll hear people referring to milestone A, milestone B, milestone C. So these are major decision points at which programs can be canceled, programs can be incremented, they can get plussed up if they want to put more money into it. There's all sorts of things they can do at those milestones, but they're key points in the life cycle of any program. And if you generally talk about the acquisition life cycle, these are the parts you're talking about: concept refinement, technology development, system development and demonstration, product and deployment, operations and support. You'll also note that the types of money that we use fit into this pipeline. So when you're talking about very early 6.2 type work, you're way on the left. By the time you're talking 6.6, 6.7, you're moving towards the right. So those things apply here as well. But loosely what we're talking about on the left is this is where your idea is born. I have a concept. I have an idea. What are my alternatives? I got to sell the idea. I got to get some money to do this thing. Once I've got some money, then I'm going to prove the technology. I'm going to prove that there's technology breakthroughs, and if there's any S&T that has to be done, I can demonstrate that this is really feasible. I can do this. Then you move into system development and demonstration. This is really where the acquisition pipeline starts, where you're getting ready for production. The real acquisition, when you talk about a material command, this is where they pick up around milestone C, where they're going to produce it, they're going to field it, they're going to support it, they're going to improve it, and eventually, what you don't see on this is they're going to retire it. They're also going to sunset it at the end. It might be hazardous waste. They might have to shut down manufacturing plants. All sorts of things have to do with retiring a facility as well. But you see all the different parts here where modeling and simulation plays a role. Actually, modeling and simulation plays a role through a lot of this process. A little less as you get towards the back end, but should actually play a greater role towards the beginning. There's prototype testing, there's early user testing, full system testing, product deliveries, and full fielding. And we're going to come back to these documents. The ICD, CDD, and CPD are official documents that support the JSIDS process. We're going to get into that in some more detail in a moment. Now, we don't get anywhere if we don't write a good requirement. And to be frank, this is one area that we're not as good at as we should be, which might explain why we have some of the difficulties we have with the acquisition pipeline. But the gist of this is that you got to be willing to put in the work to write a good requirement if you expect to get a good product out of the back end. Now, it's funny because the first time I ever saw this picture or some variation of it was having to do with user interface design. But you can actually think of user interfaces, putting a user interface on a piece of software as product development. So the fact that they're so similar shouldn't shock anybody. But the idea here is that, you know, the customer explains something, the project leader doesn't understand it quite right, then the analyst designs it a particular way, and then you have the engineers and the programmers who build it a different way. Everybody's coming at this from a different point of view. They've got their own baggage that they bring along with it, and in the end, you find out that what the customer really needed was a pretty simple thing, and you just made it really complicated because communication wasn't there and you didn't follow good processes. So a part of this is getting our processes on how we gather our requirements and specify those things into the acquisition pipeline. Now, this gets interesting here because the user's job, simply put, is to know or justify what you need and why you need it. It's a capability, usually. They're not describing necessarily a product. They're describing an end state. And it says, you know, avoid extras and late brilliance. You know what that means. That's at the 11th hour when the customer comes in and goes, I know what I want, and that's not at all what you've been working on for the past 2 years. That needs to not happen. You also they have to know and justify how they're going to use it. Otherwise, money's not going to flow. You got to have a concept of operations. You got to be able to integrate. This is part of JSIDs as well. You got to justify how many of these things you want. These are all things the user has to know. You got to justify these positions throughout the development cycle. It's not just like you write a document at the front end and you go sit in your office and wait for the product to be delivered. You got to work. When it comes to writing a requirement, this gets interesting because there's two ways to think about this. Are you describing the product, or are you describing the outcome or the capability? Describing a product would be, I want a product that it's this size, it has these exact features on it. You're designing it. You're describing the requirement is the design of the product for somebody to go develop or procure for you. An outcome is very different. An outcome is, I need a piece of software to help me manage my inventory. I didn't tell you how you're going to do that. Is it going to be web-based? I didn't tell you, is it going to be a Microsoft product? I didn't say anything like that. I just said I just need a piece of software for managing my inventory. So my personal view on this is that we need to get back to writing requirements that describe the outcome. Remember, the guy who writes the requirement is not necessarily the material expert. So that's not the right person to be describing the very best way to deliver something, the right form to deliver something. I want them to spend their time describing the qualities of a good outcome. Tell me what the result actually how should I be measuring it? Should I be measuring it on cost, size, resilience? How do I measure this thing so that I know that I delivered a great product that did what you wanted it to do? I'd rather you focus on that than be reading features off to me. So there's two schools of thought on this, and some people believe strongly that they should be describing the product, and that's the way to get exactly what you want. So there's a question of whose responsibility is it to ensure that what is specified in the requirement is what is actually needed. Open discussion point. I have my biases. Other people think differently. So this is a snapshot of the whole acquisition decision support system. There's actually 3 big parts to it, and they are not mutually exclusive. We're going to focus in this module on JSIDs and the JSIDs piece, but there are 2 other pieces. There's also the defense acquisition system. You're going to see a lot of cases and the sorts of stuff that you'll do that are referencing DoD 5000 series documentation. It doesn't mean you're not doing JSIDs. You probably are. And then there's this other thing called Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution, PPBE. That's sort of an oversight piece. That's also an element of this as well. So this is just for your familiarity. Now this slide's talking about the previous. This is pre-JSIDs, what it used to be like. So it was very service-oriented, not joint-focused, and systems were not integrated well. And there was a lot of duplication. I think that was probably one of the main things that drove JSIDs in the first place. So the Army would do something, the Marine Corps would do something, and when they were all done, people would look at those 2 products and say, boy, they're awful similar. Why did you guys not save tax dollars by combining the effort? and the JSIDS kind of forces that early. So there are a bunch of issues with this. We're going to get into this in a lot more detail here coming up. Now this is an important slide in understanding JSIDS for the reason that on the left you're looking at the way things used to be, and on the right you're looking at what JSIDS does differently. And so while they may look very similar, they actually have some very fundamental differences. The way things used to be in the requirements generation system, very bottom up, typically stovepiped. They were almost encouraged to be stovepiped. The rules did not cause jointness unless it was convenient. Going through requirements to the system and maybe integration at the department level. The focus on JSIDS is for it to be top down instead of bottom up. It's driven by joint military strategy. You'll find that when you want to start a program, you're basing it on strategic documentation. You have to start joint. You have to be looking at what the other services are doing. You've got to plug into joint architectures. You've got to answer all these questions up top. And it doesn't mean that there aren't lots and lots of cases where we don't do it. We end up not doing it jointly. You'll see how that happens and who gets to make that decision here in a few minutes. But it forces you to think through the jointness of your program at the top rather than as an afterthought. I wanted to include this just so you could see the pertinent documentation on JSID. So these are the things you're going to want to look at. Another thing to think about is .mlpf, if you haven't heard that acronym before, DOTMLPF. I spell it out there at the bottom where it stands for Doctrine, Organization, Training, Material, Leadership and Education, Personnel and Facilities. And all nice words, but the point of it is it's like the trade space that you need to think through in an acquisition pipeline. So is it always necessary that we build something to solve your problem? You have a capabilities gap. That's what acquisition is about. We're spending money to solve a problem or to enable something. Do I have to buy something to do that? What about if I could just train people better with what we already have? What if I can reorganize a little bit? What if I can change doctrine? There's lots of different things that you might be able to do to solve that problem. .mlpf is one of the mechanisms by which we are forced to think through those options and make trade-off analyses and justify the decisions that we make. So a few points on this summary as we sort of set the stage for the rest of this briefing. The acquisition community, first of all, you're going to have lots of front-end analysis, and we're going to look at that. Acquisition community is brought in as soon as capabilities definition reaches some stage, looking at how we're going to fill that gap. And .mlpf is going to be a part of every analysis, and you're going to be doing it throughout. You're going to be looking at trade-offs all the way through, because there's always going to be questions of, do we really need this? Should we be spending money someplace else instead of here? We're going to talk about something called the Functional Capabilities Boards, FCBs, and how they address prioritization and who the members of those folks are. And these are the folks that make joint decisions. And this might be easier to think about this if you think about a new platform, a new a vehicle type, or a new weapon system, or something that clearly should have jointness. Who makes those decisions, and who's sitting at the table? Then there's sort of an expanded gatekeeper function to ensure broader review of material capability proposals developed throughout the department at initiation. This is that ICD document we talked about earlier, and then the development, CDD, and then production, CPD, that are independent of the process itself. So we're going to look at that in more detail. So just a quick snapshot of the analysis part, and you'll see those documents are again over on the right side. But what you really want to get out of this is this thing called the functional needs analysis, where you want to identify operational tasks, conditions, standards needed to accomplish some military objective. So again, we're talking very high level. We need to be able to do X, and we're not saying how we're going to do it. FAA is a big part of that. Then the functional needs analysis is to assess the ability of current and program capabilities to accomplish the tasks. So again, do we really need something new, or are we just maybe not utilizing what we already have? Then the functional solutions analysis, FSA, which is operational-based assessment of .mil-PF approaches to solving capability gaps. And then there's sort of on the right side, a post-independent analysis that's an independent analysis of approaches to determine the best fit. So these are all elements of the JSIDS process and of a modern acquisition cycle. All right, so a real quick summary of what we talked about with JSIDS analysis. With the functional area analysis, the result of that is going to be what tasks are we going to accomplish. Then we do a functional needs analysis. The result is what are the capability gaps that we're trying to fill. Functional solutions analysis, potential .mil-PF approaches to capability gaps. So you see how this works. These pieces fit together, and they're forcing us to think through options. They're forcing us not to think of, there's a problem, I got the solution in my head, go build it. They're forcing us to think of it in terms of a capability, break it down into its component parts, think about what we actually already have, try in every way possible not to spend money, and then when we do spend money, we've thought through the different analyses so we know what we're going to do. And that's why we get to the bottom. When you get a post-independent analysis, you've got your initials capabilities document. You know what this thing is going to do. Now, these next two slides are important just because these are 4 documents that are, if anybody looks at the JSIDS process, these are the 4 main documents that anybody's going to want to drag out of it and say, okay, well, did we do those, and what do they say? Initial capability, and these are of course linked to the activities that we just, or the processes that we just mentioned. So initials capabilities document replaces a mission needs statement, identifies that capability gap and the .mil-PF approaches, etc. Capabilities development document replaces an ORD, if you remember what ORDs used to be, operational requirements document. Identifies operation performance attributes. So how are we going to evaluate this thing? What's going to actually have to be developed? Then we get to the capabilities production document. This partly replaces the ORD at milestone C, and it's identifying the attributes of production for a single increment of this program. So you're getting much closer to a description. We're still talking requirements at this point of how it is you link that requirement to now money is going to flow and we're going to build something. And then lastly is this capstone requirements document, the CRD, which was kind of there before, and it describes overarching thresholds, goals, standards in the functional area. So again, we should always be saying, how are we going to measure things up front, even though the measurement isn't going to happen until later. That allows us, that forces us to think up front what the criterion is of success, so that on the back end, when we build a training device, we can say, hey, I told you up front what I was going to measure, now I'm going to measure it. I'm going to show you that this achieves the objective that we said we wanted to achieve up front. So now we're looking at these are those 3 different pathways through that last little chart that we just showed you. So JROC interest is programs determined to have significant impact on joint warfighting. That's what the JROC, which is a group of people, will decide. And joint integration would be programs without a significant joint impact, but with interoperability certifications required. So this means all the services don't need it, but this program is maybe just for the Army, but we're going to sit it on top of a joint architecture, so it does impact jointness in some way, even though only the Army is going to end up using this particular product. Then there's independent, where the program is not joint. It's not going to require additional oversight, and we don't need certifications. So it starts at the top, works towards the bottom, and just because it's not joint doesn't mean it's dead. It just means that it's going to follow a different pathway. Now this is important because you'll see that the functional capabilities boards are joint, because you see that there's 6 chartered by the JROC, but they're separated into different domain spaces. So command and control, battle space awareness, force application, focus logistics. And these can change. They can make these up as they go along as different things come in. might see one on cyber, you might see one on, littoral warfare, something like that. Whatever the services agree on are important focus areas, you'll see these pop up, and that way you get a deeper domain knowledge in the different areas where jointness is particularly important, so that we make sure we get the right people thinking about the right things and make joint determinations in the correct way. So when we think about cost as an independent variable, you've got some mission spectrum with a frequency of missions on the vertical. You've got some things that need extreme capabilities that are rare, but the fat part of the mission spectrum are the things that we do the most. So you've got extreme combat on one side, and what you get are system costs, where you've got out on the end of extreme combat, the costs are extraordinarily high, and what you really want to know is what are the incremental costs in this range. This much capability is gained for this additional cost. So you're thinking about cost as an independent variable. This is important for decision makers. Are we willing to spend that much money for that much capability gain to meet a particular objective for a particular flavor of combat that may or may not be very common? And they have to make a decision on these sorts of things. So here you get further out on the curve, notice that it costs a lot more and you're getting less capability gain. So this is where the decisions are being made. So what you're looking for, what analysts are often looking for, is the knee in the curve. So they might be looking, this is where .mil.pf comes in, where they might say, hey, I can't ignore all that piece of extreme combat. I mean, we don't get to decide as a military what we're going to go do. We're going to have to go do that. But how are we going to do that? Do we have to do an acquisition to get there, or is there some other way of achieving that goal? And this is where those decisions are being made. All right, quick summary of JSIDS. So JSIDS is top-down. That's very important. It's not bottom-up. And the capabilities are, we call, born joint. You think about jointness at the beginning, and you're looking at joint documentation to motivate your program from the get-go. And you are not joint by exception within JSIDS. So there's these analysis steps, the FAA, the FNA, the FSA, and the post-independent analysis. These are all steps of the analysis before it really officially enters the acquisition pipeline. You learned about what all the different documentation that goes along with JSIDS. You learned about the joint potential designators, the folks that make decisions about jointness or not, so that the program can continue. And you also learned about the Functional Capabilities Board, divided into the different warfighting communities or disciplines or specialties that can make the decisions about jointness at a very high level. And here's where you want to look for the DoD 5000 series resources. Lots of JSIDS information here. Really, this is just meant to be a very high-level overview, so you know what the words mean in JSIDS. But really, everything you want to know about JSIDS is Defense Acquisition University. That's their domain, and they've got whole courses of education and training on this topic exactly. So that's all we're going to talk about with respect to acquisition, and particularly JSIDS. So got to get your brain thinking about the new words rather than the old words. And if you're going to be dealing with acquisition, be doing program management, some facet of this sort of stuff is going to reach out and touch you at some point. So it's important to at least understand the basics of JSIDS.